Hey, you want to know what the mathematically fastest way to farm all deposits is? Set it on fire! Set it on fire! Thank you. Everyone is Jinx and I'm a Genshin Impact math guy now. And yes, for those of you who didn't know, if you set the grass on fire in the overworld and then parry it with Beidou, you can instantly get a max level parry off because all of those fire tick damage from the grass being on fire count as hit instances. Anytime I'm doing my daily crystal farming, I always have a Beidou and a Bennett in the party just so I can mine faster. Also, yes, I know Razor's charge E does also mine very quickly, however Beidou's max level parry has like 50% more range. Alright, so the point of this video is to cover some things that I failed to mention in the previous video about my first week Childe impressions. There are a few things specifically about the current math we have on Childe relative to other carries I didn't really talk about, but looking through the comments, I realized it was really important to discuss these things so you guys have accurate information. But before we get into that, just real quick, I want to make sure to mention that we do have a Twitter where you can follow us for the most up-to-date information. Jinx Mathlos is mine, and the company Twitter is Jinx Tuner, run by Tuner, and then also Tuner does stream on Twitch almost every single day. He is currently grinding his relatively new account to AR40, running the Wall Battery comp as well as some Bennett comp, so be sure to go check that out. So when I was talking in the previous video about how Childe's teams can compete with god tier teams like Diluc Venti teams or Klee Vaporize teams or things like that, that is looking at their total team's output, including synergies like being able to use Childe's ult off of cooldown and vaporizing every hit. When you are maximizing the damage potential you get out of Childe by having his melee stance on top of off cooldown ults that are being vaporized and all of that stuff, the potential does get very high. Very similar to how you can build a mono composition to be incredibly strong if you build your team around wombo comboing around the 4-second buff of her ult and also vaporizing her ult damage. But this is talking about maximum output teams dedicated and built around Childe specifically. The best example of this is the 13-second speedrun of 12-3's first half, where Childe literally one-shots the second wave of Fatuis. The big problem with these kinds of speedrun builds, though, is that they're super cool to watch and you can learn some stuff from them, but they aren't practical builds for most of us to run. There's a few reasons for this. One is the amount of resource investment in the team total has to be very high, so only currently whales have enough resources to hit that. And the other issue is these tend to be reset builds, meaning they run really low crit chance and really high crit damage and just reset until they crit. And in the previous video, I did talk about a few reasons why he isn't really a true hyper carry, but there's a very important one I forgot to mention, which is that even at Constellation 6, Childe doesn't have the same single target DPS the other god carries do. Now again, when I'm talking about this, I mean in a raw vacuum, assuming you are not building a team specifically to maximize his ult vaporized damage and rotator off cooldown, etc, but just his melee stance is not stronger than other god carries. So yes, having Constellation 6 does remove his uptime issues, but it doesn't change the fact that his melee stance isn't actually better single target DPS even without uptime issues compared to Diluc, Klee, Razor, and possibly even Bennett. Now we are going to dive into the maths behind why he is actually just not as good single target as these other god carries, but I do want to quickly mention what his balancer for that is, which is that his DPS spikes massively when you have clustered targets. See, his Riptide procs are AoE, meaning that if you have clustered targets together that you are all proccing Riptide passives on, then you are going to be getting a much higher single target damage per unit. This is Childe's strength as a carry. Both his single target and AoE damage do spike if you can cluster targets together with things like Venti and whatnot. But again, just to clarify, his pure single target DPS in melee stance is not better than the god carries in the games, even if you have C6 and therefore have unlimited uptime on it. His melee stance is not nearly as strong as people think when you actually break down the numbers on it compared to other god tier carries. Speaking of which, let's talk numbers. So first off, the most important thing to figure out is how much damage does he do per second in melee stance based on his frame counts for his combo. And yes, this is independent of what artifacts he's running, because yes, he doesn't have a good artifact set right now for melee mode, but even when the new Hydra set does eventually come out, he still won't be competing with Diluc for single targets. Now, I am going to explain a bit about how frame counting and hit lag works in terms of real DPS, real combat DPS calculations, so timestamp above if you want to skip past all of this because you already know how frame counting and hit lag works. So I have seen how some people think that Childe's DPS is much higher than it actually is because they're calculating DPS without hit lag. For those of you who don't know what hit lag is, in video games like Genshin, Monster Hunter World, and just in general most of these third-person action games, when your attacks make contact attack with an enemy, you have what is called hit lag. These are either frozen frames or slowed down frames in the animation to make it feel like your attack has impact and resistance going through an enemy. The best way I can really think of to show you exactly what hit lag is to show you two different clips of the exact same thing, one with editing to show off the hit lag and one without. I would also like to do a quick thank you over to Hale over the Keqing mains Discord server, who was the first person I ever saw using this particular technique to show off hit lag. I had never really thought of demonstrating hit lag with this kind of editing style before, so thank you for that. Now, as you can see, the clip on the left is exactly the same as the one on the right, except for whenever there is hit lag, the one on the right is going to be grayed out to demonstrate that this is what hit lag frames look like. When you are not hitting live targets in the game, you do not get any of these grayed out frames added to your animation time. Adding in hit lag into attacks is very good game design because it allows different attacks to feel weighty and like they have resistance and heft to them, so it's very good to have this in the game. It just makes frame counting more annoying. Now, if we look at Childe's combo, his basic 7-hit combo and melee stance, he has an incredibly fast combo when he is not hitting live targets. It is genuinely difficult to figure out what the actual proper timing is when you're not hitting a live target for a jump cancel on this combo, but either way, it's around 150 frames or so. Now, because we're counting this at 60 FPS, this puts his combo at about 2.5 seconds, which is incredibly fast for all 7 hits. The problem is, his combo takes a lot longer than 2.5 seconds in real combat. The problem is that Childe is actually one of the characters in the game that gets hurt the most by hit lag because of his high frequency of attacks. Now, every single character in the game gets slightly different hit lag on different attacks and their different combos and different abilities, so really the easiest thing to do is to just hit a live target and frame count how long it takes for that. Now, when we do this, we do have to test it on a few different types of targets because different enemies have different hit lag. For example, Hilichurls and small enemies all seem to have a slightly lower amount versus something like a Rune Guard, and then a Metatrill Shield has by far the highest amount of hit lag. I genuinely do not know how much variance in hit lag there is between different enemies in the game, but I generally test on both a Hilichurl as well as on a Rune Guard when doing frame counts, because those are generally speaking around the amount of hit lag you get on big versus small targets. Now, if we are actually accounting for the hit lag on the Hilichurl, Childe's combo for the 7-hit basic attack and melee suddenly spikes by 40 frames. This is a big increase in the amount of time it takes him to do a combo and really does hurt his DPS. And against a larger target like a Rune Guard, it adds 50 more frames. This is almost an entire extra second per combo because of hit lag. I cannot stress this enough, unless you're talking about a ranged character like Klee who does not have any hit lag, you have to do tests against live targets so you make sure you have the correct animation times for your combos. Alright, so now that we understand what hit lag is, we understand how long it takes for Childe to do his 7-hit combo in melee form against enemies, let's compare the DPS output of that versus other god carries in the game. The hit lag change between small and big targets is so small it only makes a few % of difference in the end of the day, so we're just going to go with one example being against Rune Guard specifically. And for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to be looking at some basic combo comparisons, not like full damage outputs for teams. It genuinely might be a while before we actually have full comparison data for that. So assuming that Childe does have the mark on the target already or gets the mark on the first hit, then we do have 2 Riptide procs plus his 7-hit combo in this period of 200 frames. I know that my test was actually at 202, not 200 frames. However, I did not frame perfect a jump cancel, and for regular people, around 200 is about how many frames it takes with a close to frame perfect jump cancel. Again, having a frame perfect jump cancel would maybe change it by sub 1%, and we're doing some quick maths here just to demonstrate how Childe's melee stance isn't as strong as people think single targets. Now, all of the numbers in here are based off of talent level 6 for the abilities. And yes, I am doing talent level 6, not talent level 7 for the Diluc, Keqing, etc. abilities, because even though having a Childe in the party makes it level 7, we're assuming that there's a solo hyper carry in the team in this situation. Also, talent level scaling is basically linear, so it doesn't change that much if everyone's at talent level 1 versus talent level 6. Now, for those of you who are wondering what motion value or MV is, that is your talent damage percentage. I'm used to calling it motion value from other video games I have done math on. However, for the sake of making it simple, we're just going to call this damage percentage for the rest of the video, so the terminology is consistent. So at talent level 6, his 7-hit combo plus 2 Riptide procs on average during this combo is a 648.7 damage percentage. This puts our damage percentage per second at 194.61. Now this is actually very high, however when we start comparing it to other god carries outputs, we start to see why his single target is lacking. Now I also went ahead and calculated what a Constellation 4 Childe's melee output looks like. This includes both the passive proc that you get from Constellation 4 as well as the talent level 3 up you get from Constellation 3. The big damage increase in this mostly comes from the fact that the talent level 3 increase just gives you a high amount of extra damage percentage on each of your hits. Level 9 talents hit a lot harder than level 3 talents, and then also it does get the extra Riptide proc. I did do basically a 3.33 over 4 second uptime for that to calculate the average amount of damage it gives in the window for each of these 7-hit combos. Now as we can see, before C3 where Childe does get that big damage boost to his melee damage from having talent level 9, it's not looking super great for his basic attack combo compared to most of the other god carries just basic combos. Other than against Keqing's just regular combo without a charge finisher, which is not something you should generally be doing on Keqing anyway, he's pretty much always going to be hitting weaker than the other combos on these god carries. And yes, this is just Keqing mashing M1, this is not including any of her abilities. In fact, compared to Diluc just mashing M1 and doing a basic 4-hit combo, he's only about 6.67 to about 10% stronger. And mind you, this is a Constellation 0 Diluc who is not using any of his abilities. Once Diluc starts using his E auto-weave combos, he suddenly spikes in higher damage than Childe's melee form can put out, at least until Constellation 3. Now, when you do have the damage bonuses from Constellation 3 and Constellation 4, Childe is suddenly becoming a lot more competitive with these other carries, at least when they are also at Con 0. Compared to a Con 0 Keqing doing her charge attack spam, which is pretty much the strongest combo in the game for basic attacks, it is only 9% behind. And compared to Diluc doing his burst attack combo with auto weaving at Constellation 0, he is going to be doing about 18.58 to 21.4% more damage. Now Klee's combos are a little bit more complicated because these are base motion value calculations, meaning artifacts aren't included. However, the spark is additive, so assuming you have a Pyro Cup as well as Wandering Troop 4-star, it's only about a 26% damage increase from the spark. Klee's spark damage in terms of how much it increases her base motion values is dependent on how many additive multiplicative total bonuses you have in your build already. However, these values on screen do not include the damage bonus from Wandering Troop or any other bonuses from artifacts. We're trying to keep this as artifact neutral as possible, however we do have to make some assumptions about your build to calculate how much spark is increasing her base motion values. And once Childe is Cons 4, he does start out DPSing Klee doing 2 machine guns into charge animation cancel combos. However, this gap is immediately closed if we just add even one more teammate into the calculation, aka Xingqiu. Xingqiu is able to vaporize almost every single hit that Diluc and Klee do, which massively spikes their damage even if he's only a level 1 support. Childe, on the other hand, has literally no way to vaporize his actual hits because of the fact that he applies wet so fast, he is always going to be the aura character. Considering that Diluc or Klee teams are basically always going to run a Xingqiu if they can, this immediately closes any gap between this and a Constellation 4 Childe. The closest Childe can really get to that is trying to run Mono Hydro or running an Electrocharge build, but the actual DPS gains on that compared to running a Vaporized basic combos team on Klee or Diluc is just not comparable. He's not able to vaporize his basic attacks in his melee form because of the fact that he applies Hydro too quickly for any Pyro unit to keep up with. When you account for this ability to use Vaporize comps with Diluc, a Constellation 4 Childe with the 20% higher DPS compared to Diluc's Auto Weave combo is at best on par, if not lower single target DPS than a Constellation 0 Diluc. Again though, this is in a vacuum. We're still looking at crunching the total team DPS outputs of Childe versus other characters in terms of their full team comp damage. And once we start doing things like vaporizing Childe's ults versus running either Vaporize or just amped Diluc ults and Klee ults, we start to see where they get to be a bit more on par in terms of full team damage outputs. But the point of this is to illustrate that Childe's single target damage isn't really that great compared to other god carries. That's not his strength. Even at Con 6, he's not supposed to be a super strong hyper carry who gap fills all the time for his team with heavy auto attack damage. That again is just not what he's supposed to do. At Constellation 0 through 2, he just simply doesn't have the same single target output that the other god carries do, even if you somehow manage to micromanage having his melee form up 100% of the time. At Constellation 6, when he is in melee form all the time, at best his single target output is going to be around on par with other god carries at Con 0 because again, single target is not his strength. And this is fine because Childe isn't supposed to have the highest single target damage in the game even at Constellation 6. See, the thing about Childe is that the Riptide explosions from his marks are AoE, so if you stack up multiple targets clustered together and then hit all of them, you are doing several times as much Riptide damage per target. In fact, if you only have 2 targets next to each other and you're proccing Riptide on both of them, you suddenly double your Riptide DPS on both targets. And you can see that doubling this Riptide damage does spike his DPS compared to other carries. If you have these 4 Riptides per combo, you suddenly have 247.41 damage percent per second. And this spike in DPS even at Con 0 for Childe is what lets him compete DPS wise with the other god carries in the game. Again though, Vaporized teams on Klee even at Con 0 do spike her DPS, so it is still relatively comparable when we actually start calculating full team compositions, but regardless, this is obviously Childe's strength. Childe, as an auto-attack basic combo carry in melee form, is supposed to be hitting multiple targets with his combos to spike his individual DPS on each of the targets. This means you really want to be running him with someone else on the team who can cluster targets for you, whether that's a Venti, a Sucrose, a Jean, or even a Diluc's ult to just yeet everything into one corner. TLDR, his single target DPS output really isn't as comparable to other god carries, but does spike if you can cluster targets together. Now again, this is talking about just his melee basic attack combo. We aren't really talking about ults in these comparisons because the calculations get much more complicated for that. But suffice to say, if you can manage to do something like fire infuse a Venti ult and then use a melee Tartaglia ult into that and get every single hit on that to vaporize, then yes, he does disgusting burst damage as well. But again, that starts going into the total team DPS calculations, which are just much more complicated and are going to take a lot more time. And of course, once we start accounting for the artifact sets you're running, the stats you have, the gear you have, etc, we do start to get more accurate comparisons. And no, this is just meant to be a very baseline demonstration of Childe is not really a high single target DPS carry. He's meant to hit multiple targets. When we account for all of these things as well, all of the calculations that we've looked at so far do show that still a C0 Klee or Diluc or Keqing are doing more in terms of single target compared to a Childe comp unless you're hitting multiple targets. Like for example, yes, the leaked water set looks tailor-made to Childe, however the damage bonus it gives him is still lower than the damage bonus a Witches set gives Diluc. If the Hydra set ends up being the same as the leak, it's going to be a total 40% additive total damage bonus to his Hydra auto attacks. Diluc gets 45% from stacking up his Witches passive. Additionally, this 45% additive total bonus also applies to his ult damage as well as his ability damage because all of it is pyro type. So yeah, single target Diluc is still going to be beating out Childe unless you cluster targets. But again, those calculations are still young and incomplete, so please take all of the information in this video with a grain of salt. The point of this is not to give you a definitive, oh, Childe is this powerful compared to other carries. It's meant to demonstrate that he's not really supposed to be a single target carry. Even when comparing a Con 6 Childe to Con 0 other god carries, they look to be around on par in terms of single target damage with their full teams, etc. Because the simple reality too is that it's simply much easier to build high damage reactions like Vaporize into a Klee or Diluc team versus running something else on Childe. At best, Childe can run maybe a Mono Hydra or an Electro Charge setup for his basic attacks, which does not really add that much damage to him because of how weak and scuffed those are compared to Vaporize on Diluc and Klee. And with good micro, he can vaporize the burst damage on his ult, but Diluc and Klee get to vaporize basically 80 to 100% of their hits. But all of this is fine because he spikes so massively in DPS as long as you can cluster targets together. And please do not take any of the things I have said in this video, any of the calculations, any of the frame data, any of this as the absolute word of Childe. Because all of these calculations were very rough and honestly kind of rushed on my part because I was trying to get this information out as soon as possible. It is entirely possible there is some endgame composition for Childe that we are missing that has better single target than the best endgame compositions for Diluc and Klee and Keqing. I just personally kind of doubt it. Again, ignoring the one-shot hyper whale crit reset RNG Childe one-shot builds. Childe is the most complicated character they have ever released, and we are still figuring out exactly how you're supposed to optimize him. So please take everything with giant rocks of salt, because at the end of the day, we still don't know enough. We haven't calculated enough, and we're still learning every single day. However, everything I have looked at and calculated so far and discussed with other theory crafters seems to heavily suggest that Childe is simply not as strong a single target carry as other god carries, even with Constellation 6 fixing his uptime issues. However, the moment you start clustering units together, his DPS massively spikes. And one final thing, I know the idea of having the cluster units together makes the new Battle Pass Bow the Verdicent Hunt very appetizing on Childe, especially because it's a crit chance type. However, its DPS loss compared to Rust due to Rust's overpowered passive for Childe, or compared to Skyward Harp, is so high I don't know if that's actually worth it. Rust and Skyward Harp are so broken. Relative to other weapons in the 4 and 5 star class, they just have so much more stats because real talk until Childe, we didn't really have a good bow carry, so it kind of just covered the difference. Although Ben over the Childe mains Discord server does think it's a very strong option, so I will be looking more into the math behind that. Ben is one of the main people behind the Childe mains Discord server and the theory crafting library over there, so be sure to check the description for links to that if you want to go check out all of the data in there. Alright, that's it for this video. Man, these unscripted ranting videos get kinda long. As always, thank you so much for checking out the video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like it, comment, and share it with your friends. All of these things just boost it up in the search algorithms on YouTube so more people can see it. And don't forget, my channel partner Tuner does stream live on Twitch almost every single day playing Genshin Impact. And also, he is going to be live as soon as this video goes live, so be sure to come hang out. We do revenue share between the YouTube channel and the Twitch, so any subscriptions, Twitch Primes, or even just a simple follow does help out the both of us a lot. And don't forget to check out our Twitters. The Jinx Mathlos one is my personal account, the @JinxTuner is going to be the company account run by Tuner. This is the best place to just get the most up-to-date information and random stuff I'm working on and my thoughts about Genshin. And be sure to also check out our Discord server, the Mathlos Nest, if you're looking for people to come help you out with stuff, to share information with, to just discuss or hang out with, or to do domains with in multiplayer. We got a real cool group of peeps over there. Speaking of Discord servers, I did mention both the Childe mains Discord server as well as the Keqing mains Discord server. Links in the description to those if you want to go check those out as well. Alright guys, if you want to see the spreadsheets and stuff I put up on screen, then it is part of my mess of a Master Genshin spreadsheet, which will be in the description if you want to check that out. And of course, a huge thank you as always to our patrons. I will never stop saying this because it's always going to be true. Y'all the best. I'm gonna go work on the masterclass video for Team Comp Building now, so be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you want to see any new videos that come out as they come out, you know, all that standard YouTube stuff. Happy waifu hunting, whalers. We'll see you in the next one. Bye!